Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us today for part 5 of the fiscal year 2021 CSBG annual reporting webinar series. I see a lot of people introducing themselves and where they're from in the chat, and we thank you for doing that. Quick housekeeping rules before we get started. We have muted everyone upon entry and asked that everyone remains muted throughout the webinar. We also have a Q&A pod, and we ask that you ask questions throughout the presentation and the Q&A pod. We'll try to answer all questions at the end of the presentation. And for any questions that we can't answer or are unable to get to, we'll provide additional guidance and future correspondence. The chat function is available for you guys to talk amongst yourself or share ideas, but we will primarily focus on answering questions submitted through the Q&A pod. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the OCS CSBG webinars page. And so let's get started. Again, we just want to thank everyone for joining us. This is part 5 of the webinar series, so we have one more webinar in this series. I'm joined today by the National Association for State Community Services Programs, or NASCSP. I'm joined by Muska Cameron, as well as Paige Milson. Thank you guys so much for joining us today as we provide a SmartForm refreshers. We are also joined by states and eligible entities today, and so we really appreciate everyone joining us. As part of today's agenda, we will primarily focus on the SmartForm refreshers. There will be a part at the end where we talk a little bit more about A.2 and C.2. We know that's been a big question across the network, so we don't want to leave that out. That will be at the very end of the presentation. And after, it will come in after the Q&A, but feel free to jot questions in when we go over that section. We do want to primarily focus today on the SmartForms, just make sure that we're getting everyone there and getting everyone the information that they need as it relates to the SmartForms refresher. So we will go over the reporting requirements again, and then the SmartForm details, some SmartForm refresher, review the tools and resources, our contacts, and the Q&A towards the end. So quickly, reporting requirements. This is directly from the Act. We did want to show that everything that we're asking you guys to report on is mandated within the Act. So everything from measured performance from the states and the eligible entities, any information collected by the state relating to the performance, expenditures of funds, accounting of funds spent on administrative costs, direct delivery of local services, and information on the number of characteristics of clients served. That's all captured within modules 2 and 4, as well as module 1 and module 3. So we did want to just bring it back to the mandate across it. And as we also talk more about, this is not just reporting, but why we're reporting. And why we're reporting is because this is a tool for you guys to better the performance of CSBG and the reach of CSBG throughout your community in your states. So just a quick recap, a complete submission includes your CSBG annual report, your CARES annual report, and your disaster supplemental annual report as applicable. So if you did not receive any CSBG disaster supplemental funds, you are not required to submit anything for CSBG disaster. We're referring collectively to these 3 reports as the CSBG annual reports, and all reports are due March 31st, 2022. Last year, we did give an extension of 30 days. We are not giving that same extension this year. It's really important that we're receiving all of the information at once because we are reviewing these collectively and not as separate reports. So what is a complete module 2 and module 4? You'll see us refer to these modules as M2 and M4 throughout, but we just want to break it out here. A complete submission for these 2 modules are submission of all XMLs for all reporting eligible entities. That means if they were included in the state plan that's corresponding with this year, we should still report on those eligible entities, even if that means just submitting a blank form or uploading a blank form. And then it's the submission of the state level form within Grant Solutions, and then comments clarifying your data, which is optional. We did add a graphic here, so CSBG eligible entities will submit their data and comments to states either via the state database or SmartForms. States will then review and export to XMLs. States will then upload those XMLs to the online data collection system, and then they will save them, and then states will submit state level forms, including attaching the comments in OLDC. We are going to delve into that a little bit more tomorrow for the webinar for states. as that is more about OLDC. But we did want to share this graphic so everyone has a full understanding of what the process is when it comes to submitting a complete Module 2. I see that someone's hearing echo, and I'm sorry, they are doing some work outside, and that might be what you're hearing in the echo, but I hope that I'm coming through clear for most. So just very quickly, some SmartForm details. We do have the SmartForm release. The SmartForms have been released to about 85% of the states. As we mentioned before, we needed a full or a complete submission of modules 2 and 4 before we could release those SmartForms. You'll also receive those Module 3 SmartForms with the release of the Module 2 and Module 4 SmartForms. The remaining states should expect these by Tuesday, February 22nd. So if you have not received it yet, expect it by that date or sooner. And then if you still haven't received it by Tuesday, please feel free to email me and copy CSBG states at acf.hhs.gov. My email will be included at the end of this presentation. And for the states with databases, Module 3 has been released to all of those states. If you have not received them yet, please contact Paige Milson from NASCSP and copy Muska. Their information is also at the end of this presentation, so we have all of that there for you. Maybe I need to step away from the speaker a little bit. And one thing for states with databases, the Module 2 and Module 4 SmartForms are also available for you. So if you do want to have access to the SmartForms, again, reach out to Paige and Muska. And with this, I will pass it to Paige Milson from NASCSP. Thank you.
Thanks, Monique. Thank you, Monique, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So just to kick us off, we want to share some general information about SmartForms. So these are XML files, and they come pre-populated with the eligible entity name, the DUNS number, and the entity's previous year data. So for this year, the previous year is fiscal year 20 data. And that data is built into the forms because it's used for a lot of year-to-year comparisons and analysis, mainly for Module 2. And a quick note on process, as Monique mentioned, how this works is NASCA sends the SmartForms to the CSBG state offices. The state offices then distribute those forms to the eligible entities, the local agencies, and then the local agencies will complete and submit the SmartForms back to the states. And the states will export Module 2 and Module 4 to XML files and upload those to OLDC. So that's for Module 2 and Module 4, and then Module 3 does not have an XML export button. It doesn't get generated to an XML, so it's just attached as a SmartForm, just as a Excel file into OLDC. We can go to the next slide. So some more information about the SmartForms. They have tabs at the bottom. One of those tabs has instructions. Another one is a list of all the errors and warnings that the form caught in the data. And there are also macros built into the SmartForms. So those macros allow it to do all those cool things like compare and have buttons and pop-ups and all that stuff. So it's really important that when you open the forms, you enable editing to activate those macros. So we'll show some screenshots of that in a moment. But if you don't see a button to enable editing when you first open those forms, then you should email me. And just a note that that applies to regular CSBG and CARES and disaster. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so one more walkthrough of the general process. We want to note that the steps for completing Module 2 and 4 are generally the same for all three of the reports, CARES, CSBG, and disaster. And once again, that process is download the SmartForms, enable editing, enable content, enter the data, export to XML. And then we can go to the next slide. Jumping into the SmartForm refresher, so we're going to see some screenshots now. So as I mentioned, when you open the forms for the first time, you'll see these buttons pop up, and there's one that'll say enable editing. Make sure that you click that, otherwise the macros and the forms will not work. And then also, if you have a enable content button, make sure you press that as well. Get those macros working. And then moving into data entry. As you enter data in Module 2 or Module 4, you'll notice some cells will be in yellow. That means that something in the data, it could be wrong, could be right, but something is like might be awry there. It's a warning. And so it just means you need to review it, check it out, and it might be all good, but it might need to be changed. However, if the cell is in red, that is an error. So something definitely needs to be changed there. There's something wrong, it needs to be addressed. And your final submission should not have any red cells. We don't want any errors in that final submission. And then on the next slide, we wanted to point out Module 2 of the regular report. There's a typo in section C, the resources section. On C.2, it says FY 2020. That should be FY 2021. And this only applies to the states that received their forms in January. It doesn't affect if you're a state that received your forms in February, yours should say 21. And no other impact there. So next slide. So another thing we wanted to point out in Module 2 is the CFDA numbers. When you're entering other resources and you type in the name of the grant and then the CFDA number, if you can make sure that it's in the correct format, which is 2 digits, period, 3 digits, and then you enter the amount of money on the right. And then the next slide. Moving along to Module 4, data entry. As you enter data, you'll see some red highlights pop up in the SNPIs if rows are incomplete. So just make sure that those get completed to make those highlights go away. There's also some blue highlighting. Those are mainly for your own internal assessment of the targets and performance, target accuracy. And on the top right, there are buttons to help you navigate around SmartForms to get to other places. So you can click on those buttons on the top right and go to the Errors and Warnings tab or the Instructions or Table of Contents, just to help you navigate around. And then on the next slide, also for Module 4, this is in the All Characteristics report, section C, where all the demographics are entered. As you enter data here for individuals and households that were not included in the sections above, so this is for individuals and households that you don't have their demographic data, please make sure you only enter one program per each row. We see some people entering multiple programs on one row. If you could please split those up so that they're only on one row, that would be awesome. And try to avoid using acronyms here for the program name. If you could spell those out, that would be great. And then on the next slide, there are tabs in Module 4 for year-to-year comparisons for the SNPIs, the services, and characteristics. So these are just for you. They have no errors and warnings associated with them. They're mainly for your internal reference. The only previous year data that will be compared is in the All Characteristics report for items A and B, which is the number of individuals and households. And that about wraps us up for that section. So I will hand it over to NASCA.
Thanks, Paige, and hello, everybody. We have almost 400 people on this webinar, which is super exciting. So thank you again for joining us. So Paige just walked us through opening the forms and putting in your data. And so as you're putting in your data, as Paige said, you'll notice a number of errors and warnings come up. They'll come up as you're typing in the information, but they're all going to be summarized on this tab here, which is your outstanding errors and warnings tab. And this is going to be your guide for submission, because anything that popped up while you were putting in data, it's gonna automatically show up here. So this just gives you an easy list that you can reference for all the things that you should double check and try to address before you hand over the forms to your state office. So you definitely want to check out this tab before you submit to your state office. And the tab also has just a little bit of functionality to make it more user-friendly. So for any item that you see in this list, you can just double click it and it will take you to the data in question as well. So you'll see it here, and if it doesn't automatically make sense what it's talking about, then you can just double click and it'll take you to the data point so you can see where the issue is happening. But basically, before you send that form to your state, please do check out this tab right over here. And next slide. What this tab pulls from is all of the data that you've entered in as you're going through the form. So like I said, even when you're putting in the data in your form, you will see pop-ups that come up. So as you see for module 2 on the screenshot, there's a pop-up that just shows up that says, oh no, we're noticing that your admin is more than 20%. Please confirm whether that's okay, right? So you'll notice little pop-ups like this throughout your data entry. Moving on to the next slide for module 4. Again, you'll notice a little note right there that just tells you what is flagging, right? What is causing the flag? So in module 4, for example, in this screenshot, you'll see that, oh no, this agency did not fill out column 3 of the NPI, right? And the little note tells them column 3 is required, right? So you'll see highlighting that points you to your errors and warnings. You'll see these little notes that pop up that tell you what the error and warning is. And then they'll show up and be summarized in that tab that I showed you earlier, which is your outstanding errors and warnings tab. So as you're filling out the data, just make sure to double check when you see these messages come up. And then if you're looking at your errors and warnings and your data is correct, you're going to want to submit a comment, and we'll move on to the next slide to talk a little bit more about what we mean by comments. So like I said, you should review all your errors and warnings. If your data is correct, but the data is still highlighted, right? So it's highlighted yellow. There's an error that is flagging. That's normally because the form operates off of preset programming, right? So you know your data might be correct, but it's just triggering whatever programming was built into the form, which is saying, oh no, this seems to be a little off. That is fine, and you can ignore the error and warning if your data is in fact correct and you double check to make sure it is correct. If your data is correct and it's still showing up as a flag, at that point, as an agency, you should consider providing a comment that explains that the data is correct, right? So just letting your state office know, hey, FNPI 1C is flagging, but we double checked and the data is in fact correct. And the reason that's so important is because, one, your state office then knows not to ask you a question about that data point, right? Because you already answered the question before they needed to ask it. But similarly, when we get to the national and the federal level of review of the data, if an agency has already provided an explanation around a flag that is popping up, then in the federal review process, we will also not ask about that data point because you've already explained that the data is correct. So that's why we encourage agencies to fill out comments and provide those comments to us. And that will minimize the amount of follow-up that will be needed after you've submitted the data to the state and to the OCS, right? So again, just make sure that you're double checking those errors and addressing them as needed. One thing to note with agencies, things that will not be flagging, and this really applies to folks that have been around for a while, right? You might remember that we used to have certain flags. They are no longer flagging in the SmartForm. So we're no longer flagging for if your targeting is outside that 80 to 120% range. We're no longer flagging where NPIs where all the targeted outcomes were obtained. We're also not flagging year-to-year variances in Module 4 for your NPIs or your services or the majority of the all characteristics report. The only time in Module 4 that we flag for year-to-year variance is your total number of people served in item A of the all characteristics report and your total number of households in item B of the all characteristics report. Those two are the only times we check for year-to-year in Module 4 specifically. And the reason I brought up that we're not flagging these things is that just means that you do not need to provide comments on these. Somebody said, yay, the flagging was a big headache. Yes, and that is why we removed some of those flags. You will still notice highlighting. So like Paige said, there was some blue highlighting when your targeting is outside the 80 to 120%. That is there for internal reference only, right? We're all Roma people. You should try to be aware of when your targeting is outside of a certain range, right? We also flag the year-to-year variances, not flag, sorry, we highlight the year-to-year variances in Module 4, just so you can see for your internal reference only. But when I say we don't flag it, I mean, you'll notice that you won't see an error and warning show up on the outstanding errors and warnings tab. So if there isn't anything in the errors and warnings tab around a data point, you don't need to provide a comment on that. So again, you just want to use that errors and warnings tab as a guide to tell you, what are the things you should be double checking. And hopefully this should make it an easier process for you guys to review, because we recognize that your targets were set at the beginning of the year. So if they're off, they're off. The data isn't necessarily changing at this point, and we're trying to keep the review focused on things that might need to change based off of erroneous data entry or whatever reason, right? So that's for agency. So if you are needing to provide comments on certain data points, you can use this template that we have created. And so you'll see a screenshot of that template on screen. It basically mimics the review memo that state offices get. So you can drop down and select your the name of your agency, module, section, data point, the error message, and type in what your explanation or your comment is in that column that says justification. So you can use this to provide comments. You don't have to use this. Agencies, you can use whatever means is the most intuitive to you. But we encourage the use of this template just because it helps standardize it across the network. And that has been shared with your state office, and it's also on the NASCSP website in case you need to access where this template lives. Now for state offices, if you're a state, and you receive comments from your agencies, again, you should review your agency's comment memo before submitting to OCS, right? So we had a previous webinar on the 9th where we talked about what states should be looking out for when you're reviewing your agency's data. So we know, that you need to try to build in as much time as you can for yourselves to look at your agency's data and to work back and forth with them, right? So, maybe an agency did not provide a comment on something that you're noticing in the errors and warnings tab, you want to follow up with your agencies. Maybe an agency did provide a comment on something in the errors and warnings tab, but maybe the explanation wasn't quite sufficient, right? So there are many reasons where that could come up. Perhaps the agency wasn't addressing the error or warning in question. We have seen that where an agency is providing a comment about the data point, but it's not necessarily related to the specific thing that is that is triggering a flag, right? And that error message will guide you as to what it specifically you need to look out for. So also for agencies, make sure that you're reading that error message carefully and providing a comment that addresses that. Another thing, agencies may be trying to communicate preliminary information that would not necessarily be appropriate for final data submission, right? So maybe that's information that the agency is sharing with their state office and doesn't necessarily need to, make it all over to the federal process, again, for various reasons, if it's not related to the error warning or if it's just extra information, right? And then, like I said, sometimes the agency's response may not resolve the issue, right? So you want to make sure that you're looking at your agency's errors and warnings. You're looking at any explanation they have provided. If they have provided an explanation that says the information is correct, great, we are good to go. If they're providing an explanation that isn't quite addressing the specific error warning, then you would need to do additional follow-up there, right? So again, you want to make sure that you try to build in as much time there for yourselves as you can. We recognize that timelines have been tricky recently, but to the best extent possible, right? Try to work with your agencies in finalizing this data before you submit to OCS. So that is about data entry, so you've gone in, you've put in your data, you've checked out the errors and warnings, and now we are ready to submit. So what does that look like? So let's move on forward to talk about exporting to XML. So on the next slide, you'll see a screenshot. So you'll notice that it's the Outstanding Errors and Warnings tab. And right above in the upper left corner, there's a button that says XML Export. And we purposefully placed it on that tab specifically because, again, just a reminder, your last step should always be making sure you've addressed your errors and warnings. Once you have done that, then that's when you're going to want to click on that button to export to XML. A little note there, if you do not see that button on your SmartForm, that means something has happened to your SmartForm to corrupt the file. And there are several reasons that that could happen. As much as we love technology and hope that it makes things easier, sometimes it's a pain in the neck. So maybe at some point in the transfer of the file between email systems, it gets stripped of the macros that Paige talked about that enable these functionalities, right? So for whatever reason, if you do not see that XML export button on your Outstanding Errors and Warnings tab, that means your form your form is corrupt. And it's just as simple as that, which means you will need a new form to redo your data entry, unfortunately. So that is why I always encourage, before you start your data entry, please, the first thing you want to do is check to see if this button even exists on your form, so that you don't end up doing all this work only to redo it at the end. So that's just a word of caution out there. But let's say, your form is perfect, it's beautiful, it's not corrupt, you've done your data entry, and now you're ready to submit. You just hit that XML export button. And the moment you do that, you will see this pop-up, which you see on the right screenshot. And per that pop-up, you just select whichever folder or whichever place you want to save your XML file. So, I just click Documents because I just want it to go automatically to my Documents folder. You just click on that folder and then you hit OK. You do not need to do anything else. And the moment you do that, you'll get a little message that says your XML was created. And then, you'll just go to that folder to find your XML. But it's as simple as that. Click on that button, click OK once you select your folder, and your XML, boom, is going to be right there. So that's the note about how to convert your SmartForms into XMLs. And those XML files that are generated for state offices, those are the files that you're going to want to upload into OLDC. So the SmartForm is not going to upload into OLDC. You need to make sure that you're pulling the XML that was generated from the SmartForm specifically and drop that into OLDC. Now for comments, because we talked about comments, right? What do you want to do about your comments? For your comments, you simply attach them to your state level form in OLDC, and there are several instructions out there that you can access on how to do that. But yes, same thing as comments, your module 3 is also going to be a file that is attached to OLDC. So for modules 2 and 4, you're uploading the XMLs. For comments and for module 3, you are attaching the file. So 2 slightly different processes over there. And that's really it for how to use the SmartForms. Pretty easy, you know, and straightforward, but sometimes it can't, you know, sometimes it's not as straightforward. So feel free to reach out at any point if you have any questions about things you're noticing in the SmartForm. Otherwise, we have lots of tools and resources out there. So a lot of stuff is out there on the NASCA CSBG annual report website. If we move on to the next couple slides. You'll see a screenshot of the NASCSP website with a link there. So, you know, it'll take you to CSBG data collection reporting and then CSBG annual report. And that's where you'll be able to access the lexicon, instruction manuals, FAQs. And there's a section there specifically for submission, and it will give you sort of step-by-step instructions as well for anything you might need for submission, specifically for state offices, since they are the ones that are actually submitting into OLDC. So with that, we are done with the presentation portion of this.
Thank you, Muska. I am going to quickly go over our contacts and then we'll go to the Q&A portion. Again, continue typing any questions that you have into the Q&A pod, not into the chat function. We won't focus as much on the chat as we will on the Q&A. And thankfully, it sounds like the people that were working outside of my place are gone. So hopefully everyone can hear me a little bit better than they were at the beginning of the presentation. Most of the things that I did mention at the beginning will be repeated tomorrow. They've been noted in earlier presentations. It's just making sure that we're reminding you of the requirements about the annual report. So we have our OCS Program Specialists. Many of them are in the chat today. We have Lindsay, Jamia, Andrew, Catherine, and Judith. And you can see that the regions that they administer to or help with. And just anytime you send them emails, please, please, please copy CSBG states at acf.hhs.gov. This just ensures that if someone's out of the office, we can make sure that you're still getting the technical assistance that you need. We also have our OCS financial specialists. We have Norris and Angela. You can see the regions that they cover. These are the people that complete the state assessments and help with the monitoring of CSBG. So again, if you're reaching out to them for anything, make sure you copy CSBG states at acf.hhs.gov. And then you have your OLDC technical assistants, myself and Nikki. You'll also on occasion receive questions, responses from Jacinta Motongo. But for any OLDC technical assistance, please reach out to myself, Nikki. Please copy us both and copy CSBG states. And we have NASCSP, we have Muska and Paige. Here's their contact information. Please send any questions about the SmartForms or other technical assistance to Muska and Paige. And we do ask that you continue to copy CSBG states on those as well. This helps us with future guidance and technical assistance in any other projects that we're working on to help you at the state level and the eligible entities as well. So with that, we'll go to questions. Thank you guys for adding your questions to the chat. One thing I will say is that some of the questions we will be answering more explicitly tomorrow, but we will try to answer all the questions that you guys have added today into this chat function. So one question that's always asked, we're not tired of it. Will the presentation be available for download? Yes, it should be available within the next 24 hours on our CSBG webinars website. So that will be available within the next 24 hours, if not sooner. And this next question is from Muska. Next few questions are from Muska. My forms came without prior year data from our state. Is there a way for me to input the prior year data?
No, there is no way for you to input the prior year data. That is just something, we keep those sections locked because the prior year data is already finalized. So we try not to change any of that. If you don't see prior year data in your form, please reach out to your state office and to me and Paige, and we'll try to see what we can do to reissue the form to you with the previous year data. I think you're muted, Minnie.
Thank you. So we do have another question about trying to get SmartForms. I do think that this is someone from the eligible entity level. So just following up on what Muska said, please email your state. 85% of states have received their SmartForms. So Muska, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, yeah, I would just reach out to your state office to see about the status of your SmartForm.
Okay. Muska, we have another question. If you get an error because your number served is less than actually served, the reason is that we didn't expect to serve as many, but how do I correct that error? Should I just change the number served? So I believe that this is in relation to module 4, section A, columns 1 and 3.
So I guess without seeing the error, it'd be kind of difficult to tell you exactly what to do in that particular instance, because I would have to see your data. But, you know, without seeing that, I would just say, if you have confirmed that your data is correct and that that is the data that you have, then you just keep it as is and provide an explanation, you know, explaining why, you know, explaining that the data is correct despite there being a flag there. And that it's precisely because of reasons like this that we say to provide comments, because there will be situations where your data is what it is, even if it is triggering a flag. So just provide a comment.
Thanks, Muska. And I will say, just to add to that, please do not change the number served. We want to make sure that the information is as valid as possible and just the integrity of the data. So we're asking that you don't change information after the fact. This might flag if like there's just such a larger number of the amount served versus the amount. I mean, it's not this amount served, it's the amount that actually achieved outcomes. And that's actually a good thing. So if that number exceeds the, if the number served is actually less than the actually served, yeah, we'll have to look at that more. But as Muska said, please provide comments on that if you're saying that the data is accurate. But do not alter any of the information to clear a flag unless it's incorrect. Following up with that, if you get a blue cell and it says okay, do you need to provide an explanation?
Yep, blue highlights should not be showing up on your errors and warnings tab. So again, it's highlighted just for internal reference, just so you can see it. But if there's no error and warning that is actually showing up either on the form or on your errors and warnings tab, you do not need to provide an explanation.
Yeah, so those are those places where we'll be looking at future TNTA. NASCSP might reach out for some more TNTA after the submissions are complete, or you can reach out to OCS and NASCSP for TNTA about those blue fields, but it's not meant for you to take actual action on. Should agencies leave fields blank rather than putting in zeros? I believe the macros only allow values of 1 or more for some fields, but not for others.
If the form is not letting you put in a 0, just keep it blank. It will come over as a 0 anyways when we see the data. So that's fine.
Okay. Should they comment within the sheet or on the errors and warnings tab?
There is no place for you to comment on the errors and warnings tab. That is just there as a point of reference for you. So you can choose to use the template that we shared a screenshot of earlier, or if your state has a different process for collecting comments, or if your agency just has its own process for providing comments, you can use whatever that process is. But there will not be a place on the errors and warnings tab to make that explanation.
Thank you, NASCA. So a follow-up to that is, do you comment on the smart form or just provide an email? I think that we did answer that. If your state has a different process than what we're saying here, then work with your state on how to best submit those comments, but there is no area to comment on the smart form. Do agencies still need to provide comments for some FNPIs, like where they define living wage?
We have not called that out on the recent SmartForms. So asking you to define living wage is no longer part of the SmartForms. But again, if you see other types of flags on NPIs, like an NPI not being complete, or for whatever reason, yes, you should provide comments on those. But for some of those specific ones, like living wage, we have removed that from the forms.
Staying with the comments, the next question we received, is it acceptable to upload a separate comment stock for each agency instead of consolidating into one form? Yes, that's acceptable. It is not our preference. Our preference is that you do consolidate it to one form. And again, that just goes to integrity, making sure that we actually receive all the comments and keeping it as concise as possible. But there is nothing barring you from uploading separate comments documents. Muska, did you want to add anything to that?
Nope.
Okay. And sticking with the comments one more time, is the method for uploading comments different from previous years? And no, comments are attached, not upload. One thing that we really do want to focus on is the terminology and the verbiage that we're using for these different functions. So the method has not changed. You still attach comments to module 2, module 4, and we will just go explicit, discuss that more in tomorrow's webinar with the OLDC refresher. I'm just seeing if there's any more questions about comments. Okay, there isn't. So the next question we got is the 20% admin mandatory or is it a recommendation? So the 20% is not mandatory. It is something, a goal that we've set. So it's a somewhat of a baseline, but it is not mandatory. That 20% is not mandatory. There is no statutory mandatory limit for how the amount of administration that eligible entities can use. Liska, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that was great.
Okay. The XML button will it be at the agency level?
So you'll see the XML button on your form. Typically, the states are the ones that are actually hitting the button to export to XML because they are the ones that are actually uploading the XML into OLDC. If your state has asked you to export it yourself, then you could certainly do it. I'll just say that typically we've seen states as the ones that are hitting that button instead of agencies. But again, just make sure you're aware of your specific state process.
And so the next question, just tagging on to that, is I told my network not to click on XML before sending to me. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. Yeah.
Thank you, Muska. Next question that we have is, for clarification, will information requested for the SmartForms includes CARES and NC relief or North Carolina relief data? So I will say for your regular CSBG report, you should report as normal, which means yes, you should include CARES and North Carolina relief data within your regular CSBG annual report. There are separate reporting for CARES and the disaster supplemental, which when you report on those forms directly, you should only be reporting based on CARES as applicable, or only reporting on disaster relief. But in your regular CSBG, you should be reporting on everything, including CARES and disaster. Who do we speak to questions about the CSBG CARES Act report, this funding more than an annual year? For those questions, I would ask for you to direct them to Norris and Angela. You can copy CSBG states. You can also copy me as well as your program specialist, and we will try to answer those as directly as possible. And in some cases, we will use those questions for future training and technical assistance. I am new to the process. I heard you said forms have been sent to the agencies already. What do we do if we have not received the form? So go ahead, Melissa.
No, I was just going to say, if you have not received the form, you are an agency that has not received the form, reach out to your state office. If you're a state office that has not received your forms by Tuesday, reach out to Monique.
In some instances, I have seen mapping in CSBG databases that may cause number of clients achieving to be greater than number served. In some cases, check your database settings if you use that for pulling data. So I think that was just a recommendation based on the question that we had earlier, but Musco, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, just thank you for that tip. So yes, there can be many reasons why the data looks the way that it does. So moving forward, you could try to adjust your database settings, but for fiscal year 21, to Monique's point, keep the data as is if you've confirmed that the data is in fact correct, and just provide an explanation. But great tip.
So the XMLs, this is going back to comments, the XMLs do not allow uploading of comments because size becomes too large. Has that changed? So there is a separation from comments within the SmartForms. There were areas which the comments or the XMLs allowed comments. We do have two narrative areas in the CARES and Disaster Supplemental Module 2. And we do have a comment. I believe there's some narrative areas in Module 4 as well. So comments where they're commenting on the errors in the warning should be added separately in the comments attachment. All of those areas for narratives do have a character limitation. I believe the character limitation is 3,500. So if it goes past 3,500, the system's going to basically return it. So, or cause it to fail uploading. So as much as possible, you should add the comments to the attachment. We are close to time, so we're only going to answer a few more questions. But we just, and we'll look at these for tomorrow too. We will post in the chat, one of my colleagues will post our CSBG webinar so that you guys can see where the webinars will be loaded. So if one of my lovely colleagues from OCS can provide that link in the chat, we will do that really quick. Follow up 20% admin, is the max correct? Can we go below 20%, however, just not over? Again, 20% is a recommendation. You can go below, you can go over, but there is no requirement on the administrative funds at the eligible entity level. 20% is just a goal that, well, maybe not a goal, but amount that we set as part of our GIPRA measures at one point. So you can go over and you can go under. It's just a recommended amount for the max administrative funds. So because we are getting close to time, and I do want to touch base really quickly on C.2, there is one more question that we received, and it's about the CSBG logo. And whether or not we'll be sharing it, please stay tuned for that. We will provide that information shortly. I am seeing a few more questions. We'll try to make sure that we get to these in a future webinar. And I will want to quickly go over the A.2 and C.2 because there have been a lot of questions about that, and we are nearing time, and we want to be, we just want to be aware of the time that we have scheduled for the webinar. So CSBG A.2 and C.2, regular CSBG does not have A.2. You would continue to report C.2 as normal, so that's your fiscal year 2021 allocation. CSBG, CSBG Cares, small states only, and CSBG discretionary. For the majority of states, they did not receive a new allocation for CSBG Care, so that would not be included in C.2 for fiscal year 2021. And the disaster supplemental states, you did receive a new supplement, but it was right at the end of the year, so we're not anticipating that you're adding it to your C.2 of your regular CSBG annual report. And then you'll also include your fiscal year 2020 carryover, including CSBG, CSBG Care, CSBG Discretionary, and CSBG Disaster Funds. So in your regular CSBG report, you're reporting as normal, which means that you are reporting everything as you normally would. For CARES 8.2, this is a little bit different. First, there is no 8.2 in Module 2 of regular CSBG. So this is a new field in the CARES reports as of last year. For the majority of states, you will be reporting your full allocation this year, and it should be the same amount that was reported in fiscal year 2020, unless you did not report your full allocation. For the small states, the amount will change for 2021 because you're reporting both your 2020 and 2021 allocation. So you're combining those amounts into that. Essentially, a change that we're making for CARES, and you'll see that we're making the same change for disaster, is we're really trying to look at how you spent your funds for the full 3 years or four years of your small state, and not just looking at one allotment of time. So that means in C.2, in 2020, we were really requesting that you report it on your amount spent, and this year you're reporting your carryover from 2020. So we're almost reversing how you would report in Section A for Section C. This is only in C.2, so you're reporting your carryover from this year. So it should not be the same amount that you reported last year. And as we're sending you guys back your review memos, and if you realize that you reported this wrong for 2020, please feel free to update prior to resubmitting after receiving the feedback. And we'll talk about this more next week. And then for disaster 8.2, for 2020 and 2021, we're looking for your stage 1 and stage 2 allocations. Again, some received a stage 3 allocation, but it wasn't received until the end of the year. So we're not really expecting anyone to report on that in this year's annual report. And same with C.2, it's the amount spent and the carryover from 2020. So we will, we just want to thank everyone again for joining. Thank you to NASCSP, for Muska and Paige for helping us provide this information to you guys and do the SmartForm allocation. the SmartForm refresher. I'm looking at some of the questions. If you have more questions about C.2 and 8.2, feel free to reach out to me. I will, copy my colleagues too to make sure that we're giving to you as much as possible. We understand that it's very nuanced and it's very different than how you've previously reported. So we do want to provide as much direct TNTA as we can for that. So do not hesitate to reach out and ask more questions on that. The recordings will be available on that webinar page. My colleague, Nikki Frazier, did add it to the text, and this presentation will be available again within the next 24 hours. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We'll try to get to any more questions and future webinars and presentations, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. And Monique, I went in and typed in answers to some questions that were still outstanding. Oh, you're muted.
Thanks. So I know people can still hear us, but I think that went pretty well.
Yeah.
Thanks so much again, guys, and we'll look forward to
Thank
tomorrow's
you.
webinar. Tomorrow's webinar is a lot longer. I think we're going to do a live demo, so we won't answer any of these like A.2 and C.2 questions, but we are looking at like a quick sheet or something like that to put together in the next week or so. That will release because we're still getting a lot of questions about it. So trying to think of
Sounds good.
different ways to display it to make it clear. So, all right.
Absolutely. Alrighty. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Janae.